By luck of the draw, Mr. Duff gets the first question first, and it is, what are your top 3 legislative priorities?
Well, thank you, and thanks everybody for being here tonight, and thanks to the Leewin voters in Norwalk for setting up another debate. It's nice to see a full room again. We see many more people engaged in the political process this year like we have never before, and I think that serves our democracy very, very well. As far as top 3 priorities going into the next session, really it's about growing our tax base in the state of Connecticut. It's positioning ourselves for our future, continuing to provide skilled labor, and to be a leader in skilled labor and in innovation. We need to fill the unfilled jobs. We have 25,000 manufacturing jobs right now that are unfilled, and about 4,000 IT jobs that are unfilled. And imagine having those jobs filled and what that would do to our tax base and to our revenue. But in addition to that, we also have to make sure that we're growing our tax base. We can only do that by investing and continuing to invest in transportation and having an integrated transportation system and a network, funding our education system, especially in our urban areas, and also continuing to fund affordable housing throughout the state of Connecticut. That's a 3-legged stool in order to have a growing tax base. We need to make sure that we continue to do that. Connecticut is fortunate in the sense that we have one of the most highly skilled workforces. We have some of the most productive workers in the nation, and we need to make sure that we continue on that path and that we continue to be a race to the top, not a race to the bottom. Other things that are priorities are earned family medical leave, increasing our minimum wage, college affordability, and other issues such as net neutrality, gun safety reform, and health care as well. But I think all those things are important to continuing to grow the state of Connecticut.
Thank you, Mr. Duff. Mr. D'Amelio.
How's everyone doing today? All right, good. So my name is Mark D'Amelio, and so I've known Bob for a while, and I will get to the three parts of the question, but he brought up something the other day in our News 12 debate, and he says this all the time, that facts matter. And tonight, I'm not going to tell you that you should vote for me and not Bob. I'm going to tell you that facts matter, and I'm going to tell you about the facts. So this book right here, it says Facts Matter. It's full of facts, okay? So we're not doing so well in this state, and Norwalk's not doing so well. And you're going to hear a lot of stuff about nice programs that are social, that we all could get behind. But this is about the economy and where Connecticut and Norwalk and Darien are going, and that's it, okay? We've done a poll, multiple polls, and we're going to talk about net neutrality and other really nice things, but taxes, getting businesses to come back to the state of Connecticut, and changing where the route we take. When I was young, Connecticut was the envy of the country, and we're not there anymore. Thank you.
Okay, any rebuttal or extension? Mr. Duff? Anything further, Mr. D'Amelio? All right, next question goes to Mr. D'Amelio first. What specific policies would you support to keep Connecticut fiscally sound for years to come? And how do you propose dealing with the state's unmet pension obligations?
Okay, so first of all, Bob talked about, and we all know, that we have an infrastructure issue. Governor Dan Malloy, who Bob has worked closely with, had a $100 billion program that was not funded properly, had no idea how to fund it. So the Senate Republicans came out with a plan that I believe in, and what they will do, it's called Prioritize Progress. And for anybody who knows what's been going on in this state, we see a lot of programs and progress that isn't a priority. And it doesn't mean that they're not great or good potential things that we should do, but we have to prioritize our progress. So there's a couple of ways to do that, all right? We could change the bonding, and which is all in the prioritized progress, but we also have to make sure that we know what are the most important things. So there is a train that goes from Hartford to Springfield, right? And that's great, and I believe you rode that. But I ride a train to my office in New York City, and to me, that is the most important. Fairfield County is the golden goose, and we're not doing what we need to do to protect the golden goose, okay? As it relates to pensions, guys, everybody in this room that's not in a state employee knows that we need 401ks. We have to get the public sector that is debilitating our economy back on track. And that doesn't mean we don't have love for our state employee workers, but we're $80 billion unfunded, and it has to be addressed, and it has to be addressed by answering some hard questions.
Okay, Mr. Duff, same question.
Thank you. The issue of dealing with our pensions is one that had been ignored for over 50 years here in the state of Connecticut. For many years, from the 1930s on, at least to the 1970s, 1980s, our pensions were pay-as-you-go. We never, in Connecticut, paid for the pension or saved for the pension. It was always pay-as-you-go. Only after maybe the 1980s or 1990s did we start saving, but at that point we were so far behind, and then we never made the actuarial payments in order to ensure that we saved enough money for our pensions. Only over the last 8 years have we made the actuarial payments for our pensions. And that's been extremely important for us here in the state because that has never ever happened before. In addition to that, we've had 2 different agreements with state employees in order to reduce our pension liabilities. We had an agreement that started a new employees, Tier 3, that is projected to save about $22 billion over 20 years. We now have a new one, Tier 4, which is projected to save about $24 million over 20 years. And that has actually helped bring down our costs. The problem is that we're now paying about $1.5 billion per year in pension costs. About $200 million of that $1.5 billion is actually for current state employees. $1.3 billion of that is for employees hired before 1984. And as I always like to say, I guess in elementary school I should have written my state senator and said, you really should be paying those pension costs because it's going to be a real problem in the year 2000 to 2018. The problem has also been governors and legislatures for decade after decade after decade underfunded, they skipped payments, they didn't do the right thing. So if you look at this chart, which is very hard to see, but if this here is all about what the blue is the old pensions from old, and this is what our current costs are now. We now have a pension and a 401k with Tier 4.
All right, Mr. D'Amelio, do you have anything you want to say in extension or rebuttal? And both candidates, I have been told to ask you to speak louder and into the mics.
Okay, so this is what we're going to have tonight. We're going to have someone that's been a career politician that's going to pass the buck and kick the can. But in reality, the guy next to me has been a state senator for 14 years. He's been in the legislature for a long time. Let me give you some facts here on the agreement that he agreed to, okay? Extension of the CBAC agreement for 5 years, which was extended to 2027. 3-year no layoff guarantee. I wish I had that. Anybody else in here wish they had that? Guaranteed pay increases for the first 2 years. Continued gold-plated health plan. It's just, and these guys, after they signed this deal, they applauded. And this is a guy that is backing the unions, and because they give them votes, and we got to break the cycle.
Time, I'm afraid. Mr. Duff, anything further?
Yes. So this agreement saves taxpayers approximately $710 million in fiscal year 18 and about $850 million in fiscal year 19. Again, $24 billion over 20 years. It turns a $20.7 billion unfunded liability into a $1.5 billion surplus over 30 years. That's what's projected. It has wage and increment freezes in 3 fiscal years. It also has increases pension contributions by 2% of the pay, increases employment, healthcare premiums by 3%, includes 3 unpaid furlough days, and creates a new Tier 4, he went over by about 2 minutes, hybrid pension plan.
I'm sorry, gentlemen. The rule is time is time.
Okay.
This is a
Did I
time
go over? I
debate.
apologize.
I am not going to apologize to the audience or either candidate, and I am asking the audience again to refrain from expressions of support or outrage.
Tracy, I was asking you for help.
All right, next question goes to Mr. Duff first. Are you using public financing from the Citizens Election Program in your current campaign? And if elected, will you sponsor legislation to retain and strengthen the Citizens Election Program?
Yes, I've used the public financing system since it came out. After the John Rowland scandal, and Governor Rowell signed it after the legislature passed it. There have been many opportunities or proposals to gut the system, and I have opposed them. The issue really isn't our public financing system, because public financing is it's a really an admirable system, one that really should be replicated in Washington as well. That would take lobbyist money and special interest money out, and would actually really, I think, have a better system nationally in what we've had here in the state of Connecticut. Our issue really is that the system was working beautifully until the Citizens United decision by the U.S. Supreme Court. And now what we've seen is that we have many more candidates running for office, people who generally would not run for office because it would be difficult to raise money against an incumbent, so it levels the playing field. But when we now have seen millions and millions of dollars of money coming in from super PACs from outside this state, being leveled against many of our own colleagues, especially on the Democratic side. So, I support Citizens Election Fund, but it really troubles me that we now have this Supreme Court ruling with Citizens United, and we're really we are merciless to do anything against the millions and millions of dollars coming in. And it's kind of interesting to me of how we have a limit here for the Citizens Elections Program of $250 a person, but yet one person can write $1 million check to a super PAC and spread that around the state. And that money has real impacts on these races that are smaller and not nationalized.
Mr. D'Amelio, same question.
So I was obviously new to this, and I did take the state funding. I totally disagree with it. I think when your state is suffering and we have primary upon primary and money going out the door, I would have rather just raised my own money and try to do it that way. As it relates to a PAC, I do not have a PAC, but I do believe my opponent had a PAC, and he does a lot with it. So I think if you're going to talk about something that you're against, you probably shouldn't have it yourself.
Rebuttal, Mr. Duff?
No.
Okay, anything further, Mr. D'Amelio?
No. Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you both. Next question goes to Mr. D'Amelio first. The stalled Wall Street Place project received state funding. What would you consider a good outcome for the project? And if elected, how will you work towards that outcome?
Are we Wall Street Place? Are we talking POCO?
Yes.
Okay. So that's what it's called by everybody here, or the Tyvek Temple, I think they call it. So this is when we get back to what I was talking about earlier, prioritize progress, right? We have legislators that go out there and fight for their towns, which is great, right? But I don't know if I want someone who has never started a business himself, who has never written a check with his family's money, never written a payroll check, out there making decisions for our city. I believe we got $5 million. Us as taxpayers gave $5 million to POCO, which sits there abandoned. And we also gave $5 million to the Norwalk Theater, which happened to have my opponent's name on it in lights. We got to stop that. We have to prioritize our progress. I'd much rather see our bridges and infrastructure fixed than politicians getting involved in places they should have no business being involved in.
Mr. Duff.
Thank you. Well, we all know that Wall Street has never recovered after the 1955 flood, and through many fits and starts and everything else, it has been an area that needs a lot of attention. And when Ken Olson, the late Ken Olson, came and was chosen as a developer, I believe it was important for the city and the state to come together and support the project that was there. It was a project that would have included retail, about 40% affordable housing, would have made Wall Street an area.
No. This is an answer, not a rebuttal.
Would have made Wall Street area different than Sono, in the sense that it would have helped to been an area that would fed upon itself, not an area that was more of a tourist destination. Unfortunately, Ken Olson passed away. The project went into default. Citibank now owns the project. And we've been working very hard with the mayor's office and others to try and get that project back on track again. One thing I won't apologize for is fighting to get Wall Street back in working again and developed again the way it needs to be. I won't apologize for helping support funding for the Wall Street Theater. That was an old theater. Many of us went to movies there. It turned into a club. Then it sat abandoned for many, many years. Now it is a great place. And I'm very proud of the fact of the role that I played, along with the rest of the delegation, in bringing that place back to life. And now we see many, many programs that are there. You know, it's inch by inch sometimes. Sometimes you have starts and stops. But I remain bullish on the fact that we'll get that project going in one way or another, and Wall Street will be redeveloped again and see some of its former glory.
All right, any further remarks, Mr. D'Amelio?
You know, I don't remember the 1955 flood, but I do remember in the 70s and 80s when there was a Woolworth there, and there was a Howland Steinbeck's, which was a department store, and it was thriving. So I don't know if all of that was decimated by the flood. But I think we can both agree that the Wall Street area is an amazing place, and there's business people out there, real estate people that are much smarter in developing than politicians are, and I would leave that to the business people.
Whoever is applauding, if you keep it up, you're out of here. I will call the cops. All right. All right. You think I'm kidding, guys? Mr. Duff, do you want to rebut on that?
It was actually Greens, Sears, Howland, and Steinbeck.
All right. Next question goes to Mr. Duff first. What do you think the legislature can do to improve the lives of Connecticut's veterans?
Well, the legislature has actually been very active in veteran affairs, and as a matter of fact, in 2005, we set up a select committee on veterans and then turned it into a full standing committee shortly thereafter. We have done a lot of work over the years to help veterans. As a matter of fact, I've worked very closely with many returning veterans who have served in Afghanistan and Iraq and other places to support them and what they do. And they have said to me, and they've said very publicly, that there's no better state that supports its veterans than in the state of Connecticut. So we have worked on a number of bipartisan pieces of legislation in order to support veterans, whether it's veteran discrimination, whether it's making sure that if for some reason they don't get paid, there's now the law that they have to get paid when they get, if they get sent overseas to serve. So we have done many projects and programs for veterans to not only support their families, but to support them when they come back, to make sure that if they have PTSD and other ailments after serving, that we're supporting them as well. So I'm very, very proud of the work we've done for veterans here in the state of Connecticut. And, you know, it's an issue that we have all been able to work together on, and I'm glad that it has always been very bipartisan.
Mr. D'Amelio.
So my father was a Korean War veteran, and he had dialysis before he passed, and I used to take him probably twice a week to the Veterans Hospital in the Bronx, New York. And what they did for this man and other veterans is just incredible. So as a business person, you know, you asked me what legislation would I get behind. I mean, first, you know, I would love to, like I did with my dad, have conversations and find out. I mean, there's the obvious things, making sure that the veterans hospitals are funded, but that gets to another point, right, where we look at the fiscal woes that this state has and how it affects the social programs that we all love and support. And I think to me that's one of the most important things. But I would say that I would love to get into a group of and meet with veterans and find out what are the issues facing them, whether it's health care or PTSD or anything else that might be affecting them. But I think we can all agree in this room that we both would do anything for our veterans.
Okay, Mr. Duff, do you have anything further on that? Anything further, Mr. D'Amelio?
No.
Okay, next one goes to Mr. D'Amelio first. What is your position on gun legislation? Specifically, should Connecticut remain an open carry state, and should Connecticut ban ghost guns?
Yeah. So that's a great question, and I think as a Republican, that's where I get a lot of the questions on, do you support the Second Amendment? So what's interesting and what I want to bring out is that I am very concerned on what's happening with guns, and the other thing I would say, which is pretty interesting, is that you wouldn't believe it, but let me just pull out something real quick here. So there's a group called Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense, if everyone sees this, okay? They on Facebook, someone reached out to me and knew that I was a Republican and said, hey, why don't you take this survey? And I said, great, I'll take it, okay? Because I don't lean so right or so left. I'm gonna govern with and legislate with common sense. And I filled out this, I have filled it out truthfully, and I got the support. And no one in here in this room that's a member of this organization emailed me and said, hey, congratulations, you and I stand together on this. And I think Bob got this also. So my point is, I have children. I'm concerned about guns. I respect the Second Amendment, but I took the test and I got their support. And I think it stands that I care as much as anyone.
Mr. Duff.
Thank you. So the question was open carry and ghost guns.
Yes, sir.
So I do believe we need to change our open carry law, and I also believe we need to ban ghost guns. Ghost guns have been an issue because of the fact that A, they can be printed now on a 3D printer, and B, there's no way to track them. In Connecticut, since the Sandy Hook law, has some of the most strict gun laws in the nation. And from what we've seen of that has been a reduction in gun crimes and gun deaths all across the state. So much so that I wish other states would do the same as we have here in the state of Connecticut, and I wish they would do it nationally, because it would reduce their gun deaths and their gun crime all across this nation. Only one has to see is what happened in Parkland to understand that when the gunman opened up with an AR-15, that weapon was banned here in Connecticut after Sandy Hook. So there's still some things we can do. We can work on that. We can work on storage. I was very, very proud back in March to organize a March for Gun Reform and have that be student-led. We had hundreds of people show up basically within a week's time to say enough is enough on gun violence and the need for even further gun reform. So I'm proud to stand on that. I helped lead the effort this year to ban bump stocks after the Las Vegas shooting. So the question really is not what somebody will do at the end, whether they would vote for something or not vote for something. The question really is somebody going to advocate for a bill that we care about from day one all the way through the end. I'm also proud to be have the Gun Sense candidate as well, but also be endorsed by the Connecticut Association, Connecticut Against Gun Violence as well, to have their endorsement. This is a very, very important issue, not only for all of us, but also for our children who were literally scared many days to go into a school building.
Mr. D'Amelio, anything further on this?
No, I'm fine, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Duff, anything further? Thank you both. Next question goes to Mr. Duff first. Why has Connecticut's economic growth lagged other states, and if elected, what policies will you support to reverse this trend?
Well, over the last 8 years, we've worked really hard to turn the ship around. We've had many, many years of neglect where we didn't have any kind of a leader to help to move ahead on job growth and invest in areas that are important, such as transportation, education, and housing. Again, the basic tenets for growing our economy. It never competed for jobs here in Connecticut as well. We had the head of Pratt & Whitney 8 years ago say that anywhere but Connecticut, and then a few years later, along with all of us in the legislature, said he's going to expand by thousands of jobs. We had the same thing with the electric boat. Place where we thought they may leave, and now they're staying. We have a number of jobs coming in the state, but it comes with growing and competing for jobs. Sikorsky, they were purchased by a different company, and they thought about moving out of the state. They had major incentives from South Carolina and Florida and Texas, many more than we could ever provide. But the reason they stayed, and they said this publicly, is because we had the best workforce, the most highly trained workforce, and the best manufacturing supply chain. That's what we have to continue to do. We've got to continue to compete for the jobs. We've got to make sure we have kids who are graduating, who are college and career ready, that we can fill those 25,000 advanced manufacturing jobs with people here in the state of Connecticut. We can fill the 4,000 IT jobs that we have and all the other jobs that we have. But we have to make sure we're making the proper investments, strategic investments, and we are graduating our kids for those jobs of the 21st century. Again, this is a race to the top here in the state, not a race to the bottom.
Mr. D'Amelio, same question.
So this right here has been my Bible for the last 6 months, okay? This is, and let me just backtrack. I thought you said that, and we can go back to the tape later, but that we didn't have a leader to get us where we need to go. That's Dan Malloy, and we didn't have a leader, and you were right with him. So this is what's interesting, okay? This is the Connecticut Commission on Fiscal Stability. Okay, this was written, it was commissioned by Dan Malloy. So Dan Malloy is a guy who ran to be the CEO of the state of Connecticut. Okay, he was the CEO essentially of the city of Stamford, and after 8 years of being the CEO, he decided, hey, I can't figure this out. And he put together a program which Senator Duff got involved with. But this has every information, and there's not everything that I agree with, but it's a roadmap to get us on the right track. And when Bob says facts matter, cost of doing business, Moody's rates us number 40, North Carolina 5. Best state for business, Forbes, we're 42. Top states for business, CNBC, we're 33. Taxes, sales tax 39th, personal income tax 35, property tax 40, estate tax 38. So 14 years you've had to, I'm all about on-the-job training, but 14 years and you can't get it right. We got to make some changes here. What are we going to be, 50 on everything? Let's get real. So.
All right, anything further, Mr. Duff?
Yeah, absolutely. So our job growth is actually about 110% post-recession. We have actually the most people who are hired and working right now since the mid-1990s. The Commission on Fiscal Stability is actually created by the legislature during the bipartisan budget, which I had an appointment on. They did produce a report. The report did not have enough time to continue on. So we extended the commission over the next few years, over the next year, and look forward to their recommendations again.
Okay, thank you. Mr. D'Amelio, anything further?
Yeah, there's, you know, we have a reality issue here, because I think everybody in this room knows that we have companies leaving left and right. And I'm not sitting in a bubble up in Hartford. I'm out there in the business world, and I'm seeing companies. We know we had this great company called General Electric, which was here for a while, and they've gone away. It's just facts, man. Come on, we're not. We got 20,000 jobs we can't fill. Yeah. Okay.
All right, then that's time on that one. Next question goes to Mr. D'Amelio first. It's another economic question. What policies would you enact to give businesses incentives to pay employees in Connecticut a living wage?
So this has been a conversation we've all had, that Bob and many Democrats have brought up, that we need to go to a $15 minimum wage. So this is the difference between a legislator and somebody like myself, that, you know what tomorrow is, guys? It's payday. And you know what I do tomorrow? I sign checks. So this is the difference, okay? If all of a sudden you sit there and you tell the guy who owns a Subway restaurant, or you tell the guy that owns Blind Rhino, or any of these establishments, that we're going to artificially inflate your minimum wage from where it is now up to $15, which will increase their payroll 30-40%, coupled with the fact that, what about the guy who is making 15 bucks? He's going to want 16 and 17. And that's reality. And you think that livable wage is going to not be passed on to you? You don't think Stu Leonard's is going to increase the price of milk? I'm not saying that we don't have to have to fight, but we fight with what Amazon has done. They grew their business and increased it because they could afford it. We need to be able to afford it first before we just artificially increase wages.
All right, Mr. Duff.
I support a $15 minimum wage, and I support that in increments. Many businesses know that a higher minimum wage is coming, and they are on board with that, provided the fact that we actually increase it over time and don't do it at one time, which I support. So I think it's important that we continue to increase the minimum wage so that people who are working the jobs behind the counter, those who we ask to do a lot of work, those who are putting their kids through college and trying to make ends meet, have the ability to earn a living wage. In fact, most people who earn the minimum wage tend to be women who work 2 or 3 jobs at times. Many of them who are single. So the minimum wage, there's a myth that minimum wage is for high school kids who are just out trying to make a buck for gas for their car. That's completely untrue. Most people who earn minimum wage tend to be women, and for them, the minimum wage has not gone up in many years. We were one of the first states to increase it to 10.10, but then now we know that because of inflation and other costs, that we need to increase that. So this is not, this should not be a partisan issue. You have Democrats, Republicans, and unaffiliates, when you take polls, who support increasing the minimum wage. This should be common sense that we keep the minimum wage up to a level in which people can live and support their families.
Okay, anything further on this, Mr. D'Amelio?
Yeah, I mean, when you have a record that is pretty bad, and I was at UConn the other day and I saw Susan Beisowitz stand up and look, it sounds great. We're going to give you $15 and we're going to give you single payer health care and all these things. We have to right the ship. Okay, we hit an iceberg, and we have to fix this thing. So if I had his record, I'd be talking about all these giveaways too. But it's just not reality.
Okay, I'm afraid that's time. Anything further, Mr. Duff? All right, we've got a couple of questions on this next. It will go to Mr. Duff first. If elected, what specific steps would you take to mitigate the impact of the Walk Bridge project in Norwalk?
Well, everybody knows 4 years ago we received a federal grant, Sandy Resiliency Grant, to replace the Walk Bridge, and since then it has been an issue of a lot of conversation here in the city of Norwalk. What I've done over the past 4 years is work very closely with local businesses and work closely with the Maritime Aquarium and others to try to mitigate the impacts as best as I can with the Walk Bridge. Now there's folks out there who will say, in the community that would say, well, you should just keep it welded and shut and have a non-navigable waters. It's just not going to happen. That's just not reality. So the best thing for us to do is to make sure that we are advocating and working with the businesses and nonprofits and everyone in the area to help make sure that the disruption in the area is one that we can best manage. For example, many companies, one of which, Select Plastics, was slated to get torn down and condemned. I helped stop that. We had another business, Perfect Plantings, that was supposed to get torn down and condemned. I stopped that. We settled with the Maritime Aquarium for $34 million so they can build a new theater and other renovations. And I worked very, very closely with the Department of Transportation and the Maritime Aquarium on that issue, working closely with Spinnaker Real Estate to help manage and mitigate the issues on that as well. But let's face it, when the Walk Bridge gets stuck open and it is a Civil War era bridge, and that doesn't work, it's $100 million a day impact to our regional economy. And people wonder why we can't get back and forth from Norwalk to New York in a good amount of time. Part of it is because we have a bridge that is of the Civil War era. Now, at the same time, we're also doing the East Norwalk Bridge. We're also doing Saugatuck Bridge, Ann Street Bridge, the Dockyard, and other projects, which is why the costs have gone up. It's not because the bridge project itself has gone up. It's because the project has expanded and other projects are being done at the same time.
Mr. D'Amelio, same question.
Yeah, the only way that would cost $100 million if there was $100 million cash in the train. Here's the deal. First of all, it was 2 years I mean, two weeks, they said that's 100 million. But let me just go over some things here, guys. The project is $1.2 billion. The bridge itself, it could be anywhere between 600 to 700 million. I went to one of those meetings and they were ramming that down the throats of the people of Norwalk, okay? We have nothing to say about it, and it's just common sense. They're sitting there telling us that a fixed bridge would be easier, would be harder to assemble than a lift bridge. It just doesn't make sense. So that's the first thing. Second thing is, I don't know if everybody knows, but I have my office down on Washington Street, okay? We had, when Bob and Dan Malloy and everybody sat out in front of the Walk Bridge and did their photo ops and high-fived each other, we didn't plan for how we're going to take care of the local businesses, okay? I would have went there and said to Dan Malloy, look, if you're gonna come in here, we're getting nothing out of this except destruction to South Norwalk. I think we at least deserve 40 or 50 million. I would also add that when we were talking to Republican gubernatorial candidates, there was one that already had agreed that he would take a second look at the Walk Bridge and make sure that all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. And you have my word that if Bob Stefanowski gets elected, my first call to him is to have him take a second look at this bridge and work with the DOT and make sure it's right for Norwalk.
Mr. Duff, anything further on this? No. Okay, anything further, Mr. D'Amelio?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Next question goes to Mr. D'Amelio first. Do you support either in-person early voting and/or expanded use of absentee ballot mail-in voting?
You know, this question came up at some other debates. I don't have a problem with it as long as there's no, as long as we can make sure there's no fraud and that everyone that votes, if they want to vote early or absentee expanding, I think it's a great idea. I'm pretty confident in that I'm going to get the votes. So in any way I get them, it doesn't matter to me.
Mr. Duff?
Yes, I support no excuse absentee voting, and I also support early voting. Our state constitution says very clearly about absentee voting, which is why we had somebody earlier read the rules on absentee voting. So it makes it more difficult for people to vote, and I think it actually suppresses the vote because some people would prefer to vote earlier. They may not know they'll be out of town, they may be sick or whatever. So I support it. We actually had a ballot question a few years ago, which was defeated by the voters to change the Constitution. We had a bill this year in the legislature that was, I believe, passed by the House, and it was on the Senate calendar. We didn't bring it up because it was, by the time the House passed it, it was too late, and we were concerned about a filibuster on the Republican side. But I would support early voting. Any way in which we can encourage more voting and more voter participation, I support, which is why I supported same-day registration and other means in which to continue with participation. Even the DMV has been great with voter registration, finally having going with the federal law that we have, which for many years they did not. So we've seen a surge of people registering when they are getting their license or their registration. And so any way in which we can have more participation, I think is what we should do, unlike other states that are going in the opposite direction.
Anything further, Mr. D'Amelio?
You know we agreed on that, right?
Okay, anything further, Mr. Duff? All right, thank you both. Next question goes to Mr. Duff first. Are you concerned about Connecticut's current cybersecurity safeguard for our elections? If yes, in what ways should our system be improved? If no, why not?
I think that's a good question. It's very timely these days, especially as we see issues on social media and in other states where they haven't upgraded their election machines. Here in Connecticut, after the 2000 election and Help America to Vote Act, which is a federal act, Connecticut was one of the first states and the best state, I believe, to help ensure voter integrity. And that's why when you vote, we have a paper ballot that you fill in the bubbles, and the machine counts it. However, there's the paper trail, and I think that's extremely important. The machines, from what I understand, are not centrally connected. There's really no way in which to have the machines infiltrated, I guess. But I do worry in general how people feel about this issue, because we don't, again, want to suppress the vote because people may feel like their vote doesn't count or that it's not going to be counted properly. So any way in which we can bring more confidence to the system is important. Connecticut was actually the first state in the nation to do a cybersecurity threat analysis to our electrical grid. As much as the utilities were kicking and screaming on this issue, they came to appreciate what had happened because they actually saw the holes in their system. We probably need to be doing some of that on our own election system as well, with our chief cybersecurity officer, Art House, up in Hartford. He's worked very closely, and he has a security background from Washington. So the more we can do it. I'm not totally concerned because I think the systems we have in place are good, but I want to make sure from the experts that we've done everything we can to ensure that voters are confident when they cast their ballot that it's actually going to be counted.
Okay, Mr. D'Amelio?
Well, I think we could all agree in 2018 that cybersecurity is extremely important. So, and I don't know that there's anything more important than our vote. So if you put those two things together, I think it's a really important issue. So I would do anything that I think necessary, and I would look to the experts and figure out if there is a potential for a breach or anything of that nature. But yeah, I mean, you take a vote, you take cybersecurity, and you put it together, and we need to make sure that all of our votes are protected and that this process is properly protected.
Okay, anything further, Mr. Duff? Anything further, Mr. D'Amelio?
No.
All right, next one goes to Mr. D'Amelio first. If elected, what will your strategy be to obtain more education funding for Norwalk?
So that's a great question, because anyone that knows me knows how I got in this seat right here. And it started when I decided to get involved in my high school, Norwalk High, and my daughter had been attending Norwalk High School. And I was the kind of person, like all of us, that loved this city and loved the school system, and almost felt like we get shortchanged, and I thought I could do better. So I got involved just like a dad, and I actually went up to testify for ECS funding for a bill that was presented. Myself, Drew Todd, and Barbara Meyer Mitchell. And as parents, we went up there and we were heard. I spent 12 hours there and watched this guy, Andy Fleischman from West Hartford, just destroy people, embarrass people, and fight for his town. And anybody knows West Hartford, they're basically a Fairfield County town up outside of Hartford. And we were getting about 11 million, they were getting 22 million, and I just thought it was crazy. So I know that a good friend of mine, who I'm not sure if he's here, Fred Wilms, and Bruce Morris, put together a bill that was the first bill to talk about ECS funding and change the formula and change the percentage formula based off of property value. So there's two things we could do. We can go after the ECS formula and try to correct that, or we could do what the Republicans did and increase the pie. And with their budget last year that Senator Duff did not approve, which was actually got through the House and the Senate, was vetoed by Dan Malloy, that would have brought $5 million more in ECS funding this year and $6 million more in ECS funding next year. So that's where...
Time, I'm afraid.
CSR. Okay.
Sorry.
I know, I was getting into it there.
Yeah, okay. Same question,
Mic
Mr.
drop.
Duff. Sorry, same question, Mr. Duff.
Thank you. Many years ago, there was a court case, CJEF versus REL, and that actually was the impetus to the new education cost-sharing formula that we have today. That lawsuit, actually the plaintiffs lost, though appealed it in the state Supreme Court. In the middle of all that is when I immediately, when they lost it and appealed to the Supreme Court, is when I immediately sent out a statement saying that this is now the time to do a new education cost-sharing formula, because there had not been the will in the legislature to do that, because of the fact that many cities and towns were happy with what they got, or felt like they could work through a system, even though for many, many years, we had not been adhering to the old system. As flawed as it was, we weren't even adhering to it. I've worked very hard over the years to bring more education funding back to the city of Norwalk, and be happy to show anybody the charts of the extra money that I fought for. In addition to that, I was the lead sponsor I introduced Senate Bill 2, which was the basis for the new formula that was in our bipartisan budget. And that formula actually brings down the property values from 90% to 70%, and includes English language learners as a funding. It includes poverty and concentrated poverty, and amongst other reforms as well. This is a very difficult issue to work with through the legislative process, and it took a lot of work to bring everybody around the table, Democrats and Republicans, to have a new formula that will actually help our urban districts. It will help close the achievement gap, and it will help prepare students for the jobs of the 21st century.
Okay, Mr. D'Amelio, any rebuttal?
Yes, please.
Go ahead.
So when I went up to Hartford, as I said, I went up there as a dad, and Dr. Adamowski was there, Bruce Morris was there, everyone that had a stake in our ECS funding was there. And Senator Duff did not show up. I was there 12 hours, and Senator Duff didn't show up. I did hear in his defense that he testified the week prior. But here's the thing in business, okay? If I'm working on a big deal, it's the biggest deal. There's nothing more important. You get the idea.
Okay, anything further, Mr. Duff?
Yes, actually, I was there, and here's proof right here that I was there. And so, again, yes, facts do matter. I was there.
Okay.
And Senate Bill 2 was the bill that became the genesis of the ECS formula funding reform. I'm glad my colleagues put in their own bill as well, and that's very good. We all worked together on it. And that's why, at the end, when we had a bipartisan budget, that new formula was in the budget. And we have this funding formula that I think will help our students.
Time. All right. Next question goes to Mr. Duff first, and a couple of people have asked variants on this. Since all of the states that border Connecticut now charge tolls for the use of their highways or bridges, should Connecticut install electronic tolls at our borders or on our major highways? If tolls were instituted, how should the revenue be used?
Well, we have a very important question on our ballot this year about the transportation lockbox. And I certainly hope that everybody votes yes on that. Is the bill that I had worked on as well, I believe in a bipartisan manner, so that money that we put into the transportation funding actually stays in transportation and will be used for investments. We have a lot of work to do on our transportation system, not just on the roadways, but our busways and our trains as well. I have not had a position yet on tolling. I do know that we cannot do tolls just on the borders, that the federal government will not allow us to do that. So if we're going to do tolling, we're going to have to do it throughout all of the entire state of Connecticut, on the Merritt, on 95, on 91, on 84, on 391, on 395, all the major roadways. And it will be like an easy pass system if that happens. This is an issue I think the legislature needs to continue to debate and decide on what we're going to do. Now, the facts are that our gas tax revenue is going down, that we don't have enough money to continue to make the investments that we need to. We need to work to have a state of good repair. The Republicans' prioritized progress plan does not bring all of our roads and trains and bridges and buses up to a state of good repair. It only does about 60% of it. So we have to have serious discussions about what we're going to do and how we're going to fund our transportation system. I will say that Connecticut is the only state among all the states along the Atlantic East Coast that does not have tolling, and we have upwards of 50% of our traffic is from out of state. So we need to have that conversation, but we still need to figure out the wheres and how muches, what we're going to do for Connecticut residents if we do it, what we're going to do for seniors, what we're going to do for people who just travel in-state, and how we can do discounts or other types of things, and what we would do then with the gas tax. So
That's
all those
time.
questions need to be asked.
I'm sorry, that's time. Mr. D'Amelio.
I don't understand how the Senate Majority Leader can't have a position on something that has been on every TV, every conversation. I have a position on it. No tolls, and I'll tell you why. Okay, when we got rid of tolls back many years ago, we signed a deal with the federal government. So people think, like I thought, hey man, trucks just come through and who are they and why don't, when I go into New York and I get charged a toll, we already get paid by the federal government for the trucks that come through, okay? That's number one. Number two is, I don't want more bureaucracy in this state where we have another arm of our government to handle this. There's no proof that it's even going to be profitable, right? Let me give you some facts. So we talked about the lockbox is on the ballot this year. These are some of the dollar figures that were put towards transportation. 2011, $18 million that was supposed to go to transportation went elsewhere. 2012, 44 million. 2013, 77 million. 2014, 172 million. 172 million. 37 million, 50 million. Okay? So that's what happens when you let politicians take your money and they're supposed to do something with it and they just don't do it. So maybe if the lockbox happens, we can talk about it, but my position as it stands right now is we're overtaxed, overburdened, and the business people and the residents of Connecticut do not deserve tolls.
Mr. Duff, anything further?
Yeah, that's actually a myth that we have raided the transportation fund, because that is absolutely not true. You can look here, back in fiscal year 3 is the only year that we took money out. And other than that, this is the money that's gone into the transportation fund. Our petroleum gas gross earnings tax has actually brought us more revenue than we had initially estimated back in 2005. And that money has gone into this transportation fund. The issue really is the fact that we have projects that need to get done around the state of Connecticut, and it's a money issue.
Time. Mr. D'Amelio, anything further?
No, I don't have any charts.
All right. We are probably only going to be able to get one more question in at this point. I'm going to ask an environmental question. It will go to Mr. D'Amelio first. Connecticut's air quality has declined. If elected, will you support continuation of the lawsuit by New England states against Midwest air polluters, and what other measures, if any, would you take to improve our air quality and water quality?
Look, so yes, I would, and this is something that I want to talk about because we live in a beautiful place in Fairfield County, and every morning I get up, I grab a cup of coffee, and I go down to Calf Pasture Beach, and I sit there and I answer emails, and the environment is important to us all. Okay, I believe that we should be looking at alternative energy sources. I drive a Tesla. I think that we should have Tesla and Elon Musk come in, and Norwalk should be the pilot study to get the entire municipality, every school, every building off the grid, and it should be done. So I really believe in that, and I believe in that we have to leave a better planet for our children, and I will do anything it takes to make that happen.
Mr. Duff.
Thank you. Yes, I do support the lawsuit and continuing that, because what we know is that we get an awful lot of pollution from the Midwestern states that continue to burn coal. Connecticut does not burn coal anymore. We rely on natural gas, nuclear, and oil, but mostly natural gas and nuclear. So it is important for us, for our quality of life, to help bring other states into line with the values that we have here in the state of Connecticut for clean air and clean energy. As a matter of fact, this past session, we passed a law, or passed a bill that became law, that increased our renewable portfolio standard to 40% by the year 2030, meaning that we're buying 40%, it's our goal to buy 40% clean energy through our procurement process for our electric by the year 2040. We have a goal of 2020, by 20% by 2020, which we're going to meet. But we also have been very aggressive in our solar, we were the first in the nation green bank, and those have produced thousands and thousands of jobs here in the state of Connecticut. So we can do things that bring in businesses, that help support jobs, that help clean our environment. So we've got to not just sue other people, in other states, we've got also walk the walk as well, and I think we've done that very well. So our environmental policy has been very strong, and again, I find that to be a bipartisan issue because we all love and care for our state. We live in a very beautiful state, whether it's on the coastline or up in the hills and rest of Connecticut, but we need to make sure we do take care of it for not only ourselves, but our children and our grandchildren.
Okay, Mr. D'Amelio, any rebuttal or extension?
No, I think we both agree and care about the environment.
Okay, and Mr. Duff, anything further? Thank you both very, very much. At this point, timing is perfect for the closing statements. By luck of the draw, Mr. Duff gets the first close.
Okay, thank you. And thank
2
you again
minutes.
for everybody for being here today. Hopefully, folks learned a little bit about each of us and our positions on the issues. For me anyway, I think we all go through this every 2 years, deciding whether or not we want to continue in the job and seek re-election. And for me, I still love the job. I love the work that I do for the people of Norwalk and Darien, and continue to want to stand up for the people I represent. I've always said many years that public service is my passion. It's something that I've always enjoyed, and that I want to help the people I represent. It's not about necessarily the laws that we pass, though they're very important. It has to do with what we also do in the community. We didn't have any questions tonight about constituent services and helping those in need, whether it's garbage pickup in the day, or whether it's an issue of working with somebody who calls about a healthcare issue, or an issue with the Department of Social Services, or an issue with a business. But I have a very strong track record of doing that as well. As a matter of fact, worked very hard to bring back funding for the city so that we can grow and expand our tax base. There's not one redevelopment project here in the city of Norwalk that hasn't had state support and state partnership along with the city. I think that's very important. As a matter of fact, this year we also wrote in the budget tens of millions of dollars for our schools, for our school construction, in addition for school renovation projects and other types of projects that are important. So I'll continue to work hard for the residents and the people I serve, continue to use strong constituent services, continue to work in a bipartisan manner, and continue to help anybody who asks for help. And I respectfully ask for your vote on November the 6th, and I thank you again for being here this evening.
Thank you. And Mr. D'Amelio, 2-minute close.
Okay, so first, I want to thank the League of Women's Voters. I want to thank my friends and people here. I want to thank my wife Heidi and my daughters Dixie and Charlie. I also want to thank Bob. And you know, this isn't easy, man. This is really tough. And Bob's done a great job serving this community. And you know, when I came back. After I lived in New York for a while, it was like, hey, this is a good old guy that I know, and he's done real well. And I applaud him, and I know we kind of went at each other a little bit tonight, but that's part of politics. Hopefully we'll be able to be friends, and everything will be great. But let's talk about one issue, okay? You have a guy here that is a self-made person that grew up from nothing in this town and put himself through with a single mom that worked 3 jobs, that cleaned toilets. And I found a way to put myself through Norwalk Community College, then through UConn. I started my own clothing brand here in this town, and I'm a doer. I'm someone that can get things done. I think the big problem I've seen in this state and this city and this country is the partisan politics. And when the worst thing about running for office is when people come up to you and say, what party are you? And I don't care if they're a Republican or Democrat, that's not the first question you should ask. You should ask, what is the most important thing to you? And could this person that I'm thinking about electing do the job? So I just want you to think about that. I know Bob has been part of the fabric of this community, but I think we all realize we need some change, and hopefully I'm the person you decide to choose. Thank you.
Thank you.